Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to welcome Bobbi Mahlab to be my guest on the show. Bobbi has had a stellar career, having founded her agency, Mahlab Agency, over 30 years ago. Since then, she has been a multiple founder, a fellow of Harvard, an investor, a board member, a mentor, a champion of female business leaders, and many other things. So very, very much welcome to the show, and thank you very much for joining me, Bobbi.
That's a great introduction. Thanks, Charles.
So I always like to start right back at the beginning, which in your case is back in the 90s, so deep in the recesses of your memories, no doubt. But obviously you had a career as a journalist for some pretty prestigious national titles. Then you had a career in B2B media, and then you decided to go it alone. So what was the aha moment, or the moment where you decided to sort of like go for it and climb off the fence and launch your own agency?
I wish there was one aha moment, but it was actually a confluence of things. It was 27 years ago, if you can believe that. I can't believe that, but it's been infinitely interesting and ever changing, which is why it's been such a joyous ride. But there were probably a couple of things. My mother had always said to me that if you wanted to control your career and you wanted flexibility to have a family and things, there was nothing like starting your own business. And she had done that. So always in the back of my head was this idea that one day I would probably start my own business. And the second thing was I was working with this really innovative, fast growing new media company in Australia. And when I started working with them, there were seven of us. And when I left, there were about 300. And I ended up leading their most profitable division. And it was a part of the business that was a cash cow for them. And they really saw it as a cash cow, but they didn't love it, right? And I loved it. And so all sorts of things happened there. And I found myself in a position where I could have gone and got a job with someone else, or I could take the leap and started my own business. And I remember at the time going and seeing some people and talking to a past client and saying to her, I'm thinking of starting my own business. And she said to me, I cannot think of a single reason why you shouldn't. And based on that vote of confidence, that's why I launched my own company. And it was really because I loved the business, which at that time was contract publishing, and I thought I could do it, probably better than the people I'd been working for. And also I'd been in business development roles, and I thought if I'm building a business for someone else, surely I can build it for myself.
Fantastic. And obviously over 27 years, the business has evolved and grown and mutated. So I'm always fascinated by culture. So at the start, did you have a very specific culture that you wanted the business to have? And then whether it was organic or constructed, how has that evolved over time? Because going back 27 years, that's when the internet first came out. We didn't have digital mobile smartphones, AI. So much has changed from a tech point of view over those last 27 years. So
Yeah.
how's the culture adapted and grown?
Yeah, it took me a while to realize that I'd founded the business I wanted to work in. Basically, I built a business for myself that reflected the values, the environment, the flexibility that I wanted for my own family and life, and that because I created it for myself, it meant it was available for others. And so I think from the beginning, we developed a company that not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And so I know that over the years, in terms of maternity leave and part-time work and all the other things, all the sorts of things that are important, particularly to working women, but to working men too, that we have really held firm on those values and delivered in ways that other people, I think other companies haven't always. So I think it really wasn't by design, it was by default, just in terms of constructing a company that suited me and the way I wanted to live my life. Very selfish.
Obviously works very well. And
It
obviously
did.
as
Yes.
you've grown, you've brought more and more people into the team. So
Yeah.
again, casting back to 27 years ago, when you first started, lots of businesses when they first start, that you're limited by what the funds that you have and who you can bring into the team. So you have to get creative in who you're looking for. So what sort of people were you looking for initially, and what sort of traits were you looking for? And has that changed over time, or have you sort of focused on those traits still?
I think the traits are there from the beginning, and I think the people we look for are very smart people who are really motivated, eminently curious, and also good people. They're kind. So I think we work hard, but I think we work smart. And always at the basis of the company has been the value of curiosity and kindness. They're the two that have stood the test of time. And you're quite right about the change, because I started the business pre-digital, and I think one of the other, if you like, attributes of the business has always been about embracing change, and that's meant embracing technology. So we have always been a company that thought very carefully about having one foot in the future, and what do we need to know to embrace that future and to help not just lead ourselves but lead our clients. And, if I think about, if you'd asked me 27 years ago, will you be involved in this business for 27 years? I would have said, are you kidding? But it has been so infinitely interesting. And we have had to reinvent so many times and so vigorously, and actually been, really the first port of digital disruption, now AI disruption, that imperative to be highly strategic and keep thinking about what else, what next, has really been fantastic and fascinating, and has led to a great business and a great career.
And just on AI, because it's obviously, you can't have a conversation these days without mentioning generative AI or agentic AI. So are you in the camp of, you see AI in a positive thing within certain guardrails and enabling and helping grow the business, or are you slightly more concerned about the use of AI and the impact it could have on particularly graduates and young people these days with reduced number of job opportunities? Where do you see it going at the moment in your area?
Yeah, both, really clearly both. I mean, I think that we have to embrace it. We are embracing it. A number of years ago, we started with mini experiments in our company to, if you like, just to get the behavior about use happening there. But we are very conscious of the ethical and moral questions and the governance questions around it. So, I often spend time talking to people in the company about how they're using it, what they're feeling about it, how they see the different platforms. It's really interesting, say, the view of Anthropic versus chat from an ethical point of view. Um, so I think I remain very open to questions in all of this. But I think that, I learned very early in my career when I was working for a newspaper that was actually had been bought by Rupert Murdoch. It was an afternoon newspaper, and he bought it for an experiment to try and turn it around and to try and take an afternoon newspaper upmarket, and so that people would read it. And of course, the global trend was afternoon newspapers were going by the by. And I learned very young that if there's a really massive global trend, you better go with it because it's a global trend for a reason. So I'm very much about embracing AI, but I'm also very conscious of the ethical and governance issues around it, and think asking the right questions is the key here.
You talk about Rupert Murdoch buying papers and turning them around and stuff, and and digital and AI and all this disruption that you've seen over the 27 years you've been running your business. But with a lot of disruption, it's sometimes very hard for two questions really. Firstly, how do you constantly make sure that you're flexible enough to react to the disruption? And then secondly, with the best will in the world, every business leader at some point goes, I think it's going to go this way, and goes, oh, actually, no, it's gone the other way. We need to pivot really, we need to pivot really quickly, or we got that a little wrong. How do you pivot like that and cope when you get that kind of, like, when you call it wrong occasionally, and then you have to sort of scramble quickly to get back on track.
Well, I think if you're entrepreneurial, you're used to making mistakes all the time. And the worst thing is not to make them or not to try. So I really have no problem at all with testing things. And if they don't work, changing it. But I do think around embracing new technologies, and particularly when things are moving fast as they are now, or even, at the advent of the internet, it's about staying grounded and asking the right questions. And I have always seen my role is asking the right questions, and I don't need to have the answers. I just need to know that I'm asking the things that need to be asked, including what am I not asking that I should be, right? Um, so I think that is really, really key. And I think particularly I remember distinctly, um, with the internet, it was like no one knew anything, but lots of people said they did, right? And so we actually hired some consultants at great expense who came in to write social media playbooks for us, and we realized after 3 months and a lot of money that they actually knew nothing, and we could have done it all ourselves, right? And I'm not meaning that in a really arrogant way, but I think you've just got to do the work, and you've got to stay grounded. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I want to come back to self-teaching in a second, but obviously, as you scaled and grown, and this
Mm.
is a common problem for founders, not so much in the startup phase, but in the scale-up phase. Was there a point where you consciously went, I want to step back and work on the business rather than in the business? And how was that transition for you and for the team when you sort of made that decision?
Yeah, so 6 years ago, we appointed one of our team who'd been with the business by at that time for I think 6 or 7 years. She became CEO. It was actually she became CEO 6 weeks into COVID, and I
A
stepped
challenging
into
time to
the
start.
yeah, and I stepped into the chair role, and we actually get asked about that transition a lot because successful succession plans from a founder to a CEO don't always go well,
They're
and
pretty
I'm
rare.
really they are.
Successful ones are very rare.
So I'm very grateful to our CEO for being great to work with, and I think we've worked together really beautifully. And so as chair, I do work on the strategy, and that's the thing I spend the most time on. And when I was CEO, I used to be part of a group called, at that time it was called the Executive Connection. In the US, it was called Visage. Um, an equivalent is the Entrepreneurs Organization. They're organizations where you go, in that case, it was a day a month, you'd be with other business owners or business leaders, and you talk about your business. Speakers would come in. And that forum was unbelievably important. And I highly encourage every business leader to have that kind of community around them in one way or another, because it was important. If even if the speaker that day wasn't that great, it was simple time out of the office where you could think about things with a bit of distance. That itself made a big difference. So I think it's hugely important and valuable.
Yeah, being able to step outside even for 24 hours and away from the daily grind and the daily crises that you're dealing with, to think
Yeah.
about the broader business is absolutely gold. I want to come back to mentoring and everything in a bit, but just coming back to self-teaching. So obviously, as you said, when you started, you'd been doing business development, you've been building a business for someone else. You obviously had journalistic and content and PR skills, but as every entrepreneur knows, there's an array of things that you have to learn on the fly really quickly when you start a business. So how much did you self-teach and how much did you go, okay, for this, whether it's a CFO or with these days a CTO, how much I actually need to spend some money and get an expert in here? Because it sounds like you had some misses with social media and consultants, but so
Yes.
how much did you do the self-teaching?
Look, I think I did a reasonable amount of self-teaching, but I also think that I've understood the value of asking wise people for advice. And I think one of the characteristics of entrepreneurs, of successful entrepreneurs, are those who seek and take advice. And I remember asking a angel investor guru once what are the key criteria they look at who they invest in, and they said it's that they're coachable. And being coachable means, again, that you're seeking advice and you're taking
Yeah.
it. And I'm by no means think we should take advice from everyone. I think discernment about who you take advice from is really, really important. But I think you can exponentially go faster by getting the right advice at the right time. And so I think talking to people who I knew had expertise in a certain area or at key times has been unbelievably important to me. And I've always had a bench of people in my world who I deeply love and am infinitely grateful to, who have advised me about different things at different times.
You obviously, you just said, the CEO started 6 weeks into COVID. I mean, over the last 27 years, we had, as well as the advent of various new technologies, we had the tech crash in 2000, we had the financial crisis in 2007, we had COVID in the end of 2019, big, big, huge global disruptive events where lots of businesses battened down the hatches or unfortunately went to the wall. So when these big events come along, which are, sort of existential, shocks, how do you cope and how do you make sure the team is coping from a resilience point of view and a mental health point of view?
Okay, so firstly, I remember all of those. And, when the GFC happened in 2008, I remember driving home and going over a speed hump after and feeling almost vomiting because our two biggest clients had just cancelled all their business with us, right? And so, it was visceral. There was real, real fear there. But out of that experience came the best strategy I ever came up with, and that still is the backbone of our business today. So, how do you cope with it? Firstly, don't panic and, be very judicious and careful. I think that remember to breathe. And I think getting a council of wise heads around you is important. So I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, there were three of us. We ran very different businesses, but all established, sizable businesses we were sharing information and know-how on a daily basis. We were each other's private board. What are you doing here? What are you doing there? We were sharing documents, all kinds of things. So don't go alone is all I can is a piece of advice. Find
Okay,
other wide heads and collaborate. Yeah.
that's very good advice, and I'm going to come on to mentors in my next question after this. But just before we do, so every time I talk to founders, particularly in the first few years, the first thing they say is, I didn't realize how stressful this would be. I didn't realize how mentally exhausting it would be. I had one founder on who'd been a performance psychiatrist for high performing sports teams, and she said, my job was teaching people to cope with stress. So I thought I had this covered until I ran my own business, at which point I realized I absolutely didn't. There's always that. Another fan the other day saying, I haven't spoken to my friends and family for it feels like 2 years. They keep on asking me, where are you? Are you okay? So
Yeah.
how do you cope? What advice do you have on how do you, as a founder, cope with that? I mean, obviously trying to get a work-life balance is incredibly difficult, but how do you cope with that? Just daily stress that comes at you, like it feels like 24/7 in the first few years when you're getting yourself up and running. What sort of things other than mentoring and talking to other people would you recommend or suggest?
Yeah, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I was thinking about someone was saying how their kids keep them, reality check. And I can say, all honestly, I have spent more time thinking about my business than I have my children. Right? That's I think what happens when own your own business. Here are some of the things that I have done that have been really important. One is meditation. At times of extreme crisis, I have meditated. I went and did a course, and I don't meditate every day, but in times of crisis, I do. Exercise, absolutely, and making sure again that I speak to wise heads. I find very soothing.
Okay, we've mentioned mentoring and how important it is.
Yeah.
So obviously you've done a huge amount of mentoring, leading to mentor walks. So just tell me a bit about where that all came from and what that is.
Okay, so Mentor Walks is a program for career women to help them get guidance from senior women in their city and to help them build their networks and find like-minded women. And the program is now in 17 cities across 5 countries, and 18,000 women have participated. It's a not-for-profit. And when we started it in Sydney 10 years ago, my co-founder and I, Adina Jacobs, had no idea that it would be the beginning of the movement that we are creating. And the idea for Mentor Walks came out of a trip to China, where we saw the kernel of the idea in action and asked them if we could borrow the idea, and they were generous enough to say, "Take it, and we'll help you." And have become, Michelle Garno, who was behind the idea in China, has been a massive friend and supporter ever since. What happened was I was in China with Adina, my co-founder. We were EY entrepreneurial women, winning women candidates on their program, where had both been selected by EY as women with businesses with global potential to scale. Um, and at that conference, this woman spoke about this thing she'd created called Mentor Walks, and I was investigating taking my communications agency into China. So we get in this rickety cab in the middle of early in the morning, go to this park, God knows where. I get thrown in with one group, Adina gets thrown in with the other. But I met two women who really saved me 6 months of work, whether I was going to take my business into China or not, because of the advice they gave me and the contacts they gave me. And the value of these, if you like, happenstance meetings was so clear that, and I'm a great believer what happens when you show up, right? That Adina and I looked at each other at the gates of the park and said, "This is such a simple, great idea. Let's take it to Australia." And that was 10 years ago. So now, 18,000 women later, we're building a global movement, and we want to give women a place to have conversations that they may not be able to have elsewhere, because one, it's not safe to have them in their companies, or they have no one there to have them with, or it's not confidential enough, or whatever it is. And one of the things I love about what we're doing, but I also see as a constant theme in my life, is you never know what happens, who you're going to meet, the conversation you'll have when you show up. I mean, that's how you and I met, right? You
Yeah.
put a comment on LinkedIn that was terrific, and I said, "This is fantastic. I want to talk to you." It's just, you've got to show up for things to happen, and I think that not everyone has opportunity, and by creating this really, really accessible, low cost mentoring where you get access to these fantastic experienced women, we're giving everyone opportunity to have the conversations.
And tell me a bit more about the theory of the mechanism of the walk and why that's so important. Because obviously I'm the father of four teenage boys. So like all parents, I know full well if I want to have a serious conversation, do it when they're in the passenger seat of the car and they haven't got
Yeah,
their AirPods in and there's no eye
yeah,
to eye contact and it's non-confrontational and there's a 50-50 chance it might actually work. But what are the mechanics of the actual walk and why is that's so important when you're working
yeah.
with mentors or mentees?
Yeah, I love that you get this so clearly, Charles. So, firstly, each mentor is matched with up to 3 mentees based on the question the mentees pre-submit. So, it's highly curated. And you walk shoulder to shoulder for an hour. It starts with everyone together. So, for example, in Sydney, it starts on the steps of the Opera House. Everyone is already all pre-booked. You arrive, you're told who you're mentored with, or the mentors introduce themselves. You find your mentor, and then you will walk and talk with a mentor and up to 3 other mentees for an hour, workshopping each other's questions. And so it's fast and furious. It's a bit like a startup pitch, right? Which is, what's your issue, and let's talk about it now. Everyone in the group participates, asking questions and so forth. But you're actually absolutely right. It's intimate without being intimidating, because you're shoulder to shoulder and you're looking forward. It's not like being, across from a mentor and a table where you're eyeballing each other, and so forth. So it's instantly safe. And like you said, the best conversations you have with teenagers in the car is in the car because you're looking forward. The other thing is that's outdoors and the walking. So whilst we do run it virtually and it works virtually, the walking and talking, there is a science to walking. There's a reason the poets like Wordsworth walked, and it's good for creativity. It's good for oxygenating blood. It's good for all sorts of things. So it's a very simple model. It's not simple at all to execute. Like all events programs, they're really quite difficult to execute. But the model, the concept itself is simple.
Okay, and I know you did some work at Harvard on it with some professors and academics there on, like really looking into the value of, of mentorship and what it can do for any sort of business owner. What were some of the things that came out of the work that you did in that year?
Yeah. That I was a fellow at Harvard for a year. For 2024, I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and spent the year studying all different things there, including AI, I should say. And I call it my year of disruption. I wanted to go and really just test my thinking, learn. To your question, and do you teach yourself or do you learn from others? And it's always a bit of both. I was fortunate in that year that I was approached by a professor at the Harvard Business School who specializes in gender equality and mentoring. And she asked if MentorWalks would be interested in collaborating with the business school on a study into mentorship led by one of their PhD students. So the answer was, of course, yes. And it's been really exciting. And remain an executive fellow at the business school to continue this work. So we've done 3 field studies. It's early days, but what we're learning is that one, our mentors underestimate the effect that they're having on the people they're mentoring.
Really?
The feedback. So what the study showed was that we are beyond meeting the expectations of the mentees. And the second thing we learned is that what the mentees value the most is the practical advice. They value the emotional support because confidence is always an issue for
Yeah.
women. But what they value more is the practical advice. And when they get both practical and emotional, that's a home run. But if you had to have a hierarchy, it would be the practical advice first. So that's what we've learned so far, but it's ongoing.
And as an investor and a mentor and a female founder yourself, I mean the stats are pretty shocking. I think 97% of VC money goes to men,
Yep.
90% of bank loans to SMEs goes to male-owned businesses. I mean it's really very, very hard. So what are some of the things that can be done other than what you're already doing? Do you think, more generally to help encourage female founders and to support them?
One, you've got to invest in them. And I do. I belong to a number of groups that are investing in female founders. I think that it's really important that all of us, and particularly women, encourage men to understand why investing in women founders makes sense. And I also think it's really incumbent on when people are pitching to you that there's a lot of studies that show that different questions are asked of women and men. Um, there's studies that show that women will be asked more about what happens when things go wrong, and men will be asked more about what their growth strategy. I mean,
Really?
the data shows unbelievable bias and sort of nuanced bias time and time and time again. So I think there are, at a systems level, there's things that can be done. But I love the way you're advocating for female founders, and we need more men to do it. And women alone are not going to do things. This is, if we lift women, the tide for everyone rises, and men have to be part of that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about growth. My last business, RFI, did a huge amount of research into SME owners, and it was a simple truism that male SME owners tended to overestimate their growth and their numbers for the year, and female
Mhm.
SME owners tended to underestimate and be much more cautious. But broadening it out to sort of founders in general, there's a phrase I came across almost a year ago now called founder tourism, which is where you have back in I mean, my first business like you was back in '96, and in those days, being a founder was Well, you didn't call yourself a founder for a start. People just thought it was an odd thing to do to go and start your own business. But that was before kind of like, all the Hollywood, Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And now being a founder and having a startup is the coolest thing on the planet. And you have this founder tourism where people are like, I'm going to be a founder. And, they start with this amazing idea and all this aspiration and hope and optimism, and then run headfirst into a brick wall and discover that the reality is very, very different. And, the odds are very much stacked against you to be successful. So how do existing founders and communities encourage people to start businesses, which is so essential to the economy and to growth and to personal development amongst many other things, but at the same time with an element of caution of like, look, this is not all fun and games and wandering around in meadows with sunflowers and rainbows. There's a bit of hard yards involved here. What more things can we do to encourage founders?
I think, look, I think particularly as we, with AI and a lot of talk about micro businesses, and everyone's got to, the opportunities will be in uh, starting your own thing, both at like to grow to scale, but also micro. I think it's about being realistic about what it's like, and I think it's also about recognizing it's really not for everyone, because
Yeah.
you need to really back yourself. You need to have a higher risk appetite. You have to, there are some real differences. I never forget this guy coming to see me, and he said, I wanted to talk to you because I want to start my own business. And I said, why do you want to do it? And he said, oh, because I want lifestyle. And I just sort of, I just
That's,
sort of
that's a red flag if
laughed.
ever there was one.
I just said, mate, you are never ever going to work as hard and as long as you are in your own business. But the beautiful thing about it is that I think there's great joy in shaping your own destiny. No one can fire you, only you can fire you. So often, and particularly at the moment, we're seeing so many redundancies everywhere, and at least you have some control if you're running your own business. So I think there are terrific things about it, and also you can scale up or down. Not every business needs to be big. I think you've got a lot of choices if you run your own business that you don't have if you're working for someone else. So what can we do to encourage them? Be real about what it takes.
That's
Yeah.
interesting what you said. Not every business needs to be big, because I advise quite a few businesses at the moment, and there is this sort of almost obsession that unless you can scale to 1 billion, then the idea is not worth it. And trying to get people to understand, look, you've got a really good idea here. You can build this into a very successful business over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Have a really challenging and enjoyable life. It doesn't have to be a global domination or nothing. Like there's plenty in between. But again, it's this sort of Hollywoodization, I guess. And then as a female founder, how have you? I mean, obviously you've been a female founder for 30 years now. Yeah, how have you coped when? And I'm assuming here, so forgive my presumption. How have you coped when you've bumped into the basically sexism when you say I'm the founder, etc., etc. Like what are some of the ways that other female founders can learn about how to navigate around what unfortunately inevitably will happen?
I think you can navigate it in a sort of clear way that's not insulting to the person. You can say, why do you think that? Or that's an interesting take. Um, Look, I think just like any difficult conversations, there's ways to navigate it, but I also think you have to be judicious about when you navigate it, because if you're pitching for funding, right, you don't want to humiliate someone, but you might address it later. Or, I just really think it's at the moment, it's a judicious decision about what's the best way to respond. But I think it's important never to lose your cool.
Okay, so if we can, I would always like asking this question. If you could go back 30 years in a
Yeah.
time machine and meet yourself, back at the start of the 90s, just as you're about to launch Marlab, what would be the one lesson you would tell your younger self that you've learned over the last 30 years? Well, not necessarily the one lesson, but what would be the most important one or two things you would tell your 30-year younger self that would have made life easier, slightly less challenging, quicker to get down the road? Like what would be some of the things that you would say?
Two things. Um, Seek advice faster, and secondly, lighten up. Like
Lighten
you
up.
remember to, yeah, remember to have fun. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. Like just make sure you have a good time. And when I say good time, just make sure there's joy there. Like things can get very serious, and you really need to keep the lightness and keep you've got to enjoy it. Yeah.
Got to enjoy it. That's a fantastic piece of advice to wrap up on as we're out of time. But telling everyone to keep it light, I think, is brilliant advice from someone who's been doing it so successfully for 30 years. So thank you very much for joining me and for sharing all your wisdom and learnings. And it's fascinating to hear about the mentor walks. And anyone listening who's interested, just Google mentorwalks.org, and you can find out a lot more about what Bobbi's up to.
Thanks so much, Charles, and for what you're doing for founders. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.